She had been awake since 4 o'clock that morning, and she had not eaten since the night before, and by the time the musicians struck up the first dance, she was holding herself upright by will alone, the way a person holds a door shut against a wind. No one in that blazing ballroom knew it. That was the thing about Adeline Brooke that her aunt had perfected over 3 years. She could be made to look, for a few hours, exactly like the other young ladies, the borrowed gown taken in and let out and taken in again to fit a frame that had grown thinner each season, the borrowed gloves drawn up over hands her aunt would not let the world see, the dark hair dressed by Adeline's own tired fingers at midnight because no maid could be spared for a poor relation. For a few hours she could be made to pass, and in those few hours her aunt, Mrs. Sefton, would parade her through the season's ballrooms beside her own daughter Drusilla, not because Mrs. Sefton wished Adeline to marry well. Mrs. Sefton wished no such thing, for a well-married Adeline might rise above her, and Mrs. Sefton's whole comfort depended on Adeline remaining beneath her. But because society expected a family to bring out all its girls, and not to bring out the orphan niece would invite the very questions Mrs. Sefton most wished to avoid. So Adeline was brought out, she was displayed, and danced, and then taken home and put back into her real life, which began again at 4 o'clock the next morning with the grates to be blacked before the household woke. She had blacked the grates that morning. She had carried the coal and scrubbed the front steps and helped the cook, and dressed Drusilla's hair twice because Drusilla was not satisfied the first time, and run 3 errands on foot in the cold, and been given, in the way of food, a heel of yesterday's bread and a cup of tea gone cold, because Mrs. Sefton held that a girl who ate too much grew coarse, and that a slender figure was the one asset poverty could not strip from a niece, and must therefore be maintained by economy at the table. And then, at 8 o'clock, Mrs. Sefton had laced her into the borrowed gown, laced it hard, harder than was kind, for a small waist was admired, and Adeline's aunt admired economy in all things, including breath, and sent her out to dance. The first dance was a country dance, brisk, with much turning, and Adeline made it through the first figures on will alone. She smiled. She had learned to smile through a great deal. Her partner was a pleasant, vacant young man whose name she had already forgotten, and he chattered, and she answered at the right moments, and the room turned, and the candles blazed, 10,000 of them, it seemed, hot and bright and swimming now at the edges of her sight. And she thought, with the distant clarity that comes before such things, I must not faint. If I faint, my aunt will be humiliated, and if my aunt is humiliated, she will punish me, and if she punishes me, she may turn out Lottie, and I must not faint. And she turned in the figure, and the floor came up strangely to meet her, tilting, and the candles ran together into one long streak of gold, and the music went very far away, and the last thing Adeline Brooke thought, with that distant, terrible clarity, before the gold swallowed everything, was Lottie. Oh, Lottie, forgive me, I tried. And then the floor of the ballroom was rising toward her, and she did not feel it strike, because she never reached it. For across the ballroom, against the wall where he had been standing the whole evening in cynical boredom watching the marriage market grind through its paces, the Duke of Hawkridge had seen her go. He had, in truth, been watching her for some minutes, though not for the reasons a man usually watched a young woman at a ball. He had been watching her because something about her had snagged his cynical attention, some wrongness he could not at first name. She was lovely. That was not it. The room was full of lovely girls, and they bored him to despair. It was that she was lovely the way a candle is bright just before it gutters. Too bright, too fixed. The smile held a half-second too long, the color too high on cheeks that were, beneath the high color, the wrong sort of pale. He had watched ballrooms his whole adult life, and he knew the look of a woman enjoying herself and the look of a woman performing enjoyment, and this one was performing it the way a soldier performs, standing upright after a wound, by main force with something underneath the performance that had nothing to do with pleasure at all. He had been trying, in his bored, cynical way, to decide what it was. And then he had seen the precise moment it failed, seen the smile slip, and the eyes lose their focus, and the body begin, with a dreadful slowness, to fold. And the Duke of Hawkridge, who had not moved quickly for anyone in a great many years, was across that ballroom and had her in his arms before she struck the floor, before most of the room had even understood that anything was happening. She weighed almost nothing. That was the first thing he knew, lifting her. And it was the thing that turned his idle, cynical attention, in a single instant, into something cold and hard and very far from idle. He had lifted his share of women who had fainted in overheated ballrooms, swooned for effect or for tight lacing or for the genuine close airless heat of 500 candles and 500 bodies. They had weight. They had the ordinary substance of well-fed women in fine gowns. This one weighed nothing at all. She came up into his arms like a bundle of kindling, like something half made of air, and through the fine borrowed silk he could feel, with a clarity that made his jaw set, the sharp architecture of a frame with nothing spare on it anywhere, the shoulder blades like folded wings, the wrist his hand closed around no thicker than a child's. And the Duke of Hawkridge, holding her, felt the bottom drop out of his cynical evening and the old buried grief rise up in its place, cold and certain because he had held a woman who weighed nothing in his arms once before, years ago, and she had been his sister, and she had died. "Stand back," he said, to the gathering, gabbling, useless crowd, and his voice was so cold and so absolute that the crowd stood back. "Stand back and send for my carriage, and someone fetch this room some air. Now." And the Duke of Hawkridge carried the unconscious girl out of the ballroom, out through the parting, astonished crowd, her dark head against his shoulder, her borrowed gloves and her nothing weight and her too pale face, and he did not know, as he carried her, that he would never, as long as he lived, return her to that floor, but the resolve was already forming in him, cold and clear, before she had even opened her eyes. He carried her to a small anteroom off the great hall and laid her on a sofa, and it was there, in the better light of a single branch of candles, that the Duke of Hawkridge learned the rest of what the ballroom's flattering blaze had hidden. He drew off one of the borrowed gloves to chafe her wrist, and stopped, the glove in his hand, looking at the hand it had hidden. For it was not a lady's hand. It was a hand that had been scrubbed raw and worked hard, the knuckles reddened and chapped, a half-healed burn across the back of it of the kind one gets from a kitchen grate, the nails broken short, a callus where a scrubbing brush rides. It was a servant's hand, a hard-working servant's hand, drawn up for a few hours into a borrowed glove and passed off as a lady's, and the contrast between the hand and the fine silk gown it belonged to told the Duke of Hawkridge in a single glance the whole of a story that made the cold thing in his chest go colder still. He had been right. She had been performing. And what she had been performing was not enjoyment, and not even mere good health. She had been performing being a person who was cared for, when she was in fact a person who was being worked half to death and starved the rest of the way, and dressed up 2 evenings a week to hide it from a world that would have been scandalized to learn how the other 5 evenings were spent. The door burst open behind him, and a stout, overdressed, breathless woman swept in, all agitation and apology, and the Duke knew her sort before she had said a word. "Your Grace! Oh, Your Grace, I am so dreadfully sorry, so mortified, that my niece should have— She is the most provoking girl. She has always been delicate, prone to these little vapors. It is nothing, nothing at all. A touch of the heat and the excitement, you know how young girls are." "Adeline! Adeline, wake up at once, you wicked girl. You are inconveniencing his Grace." "I do apologize, Your Grace. She will be quite well directly, only a little faint, and then she may return to the floor. She has 2 more dances promised, and it would be such a pity to disappoint the young gentleman. Do you not think? If you would be so very kind as to hand her to me, I shall have her dancing again within the quarter hour, I promise you, and we need trouble you no further." "What is your name, madam?" said the Duke of Hawkridge. Sefton, Your Grace, Mrs. Sefton. Adeline is my late sister's child. I have raised her from an orphan, out of Christian charity these 3 years, at no small expense, and this is how she— Mrs. Sefton." The Duke straightened and turned and looked at the woman, and Mrs. Sefton's flow of words dried up under that look as a puddle dries under a hard sun. "You wish me to hand your niece back to you so that she may return to the floor and dance the 2 dances she has promised within the quarter hour. Have I understood you?" "Why, yes, your grace, if you would be so good. Madam, your niece has not fainted from the heat." The Duke's voice was very quiet and very level, and far more terrible for it than shouting would have been. "I have carried fainting women before. They have the weight of women who eat. Your niece weighs nothing, nothing, madam. I have lifted children heavier. I could feel every bone in her through a silk gown. Her hands," he held up the glove, "are the hands of a scullery maid, raw and burned and broken-nailed, drawn up into borrowed gloves to deceive a ballroom. She has not swooned from excitement. She has collapsed from hunger and exhaustion, the plain bodily collapse of a person who has been given too little to eat and too much to do for a very long time, and who held herself upright tonight on nothing but will until the will ran out. That is what I am holding, madam. And you wish me to hand it back to you so that it may dance 2 more dances. I will tell you plainly what I think of that wish, and then I will tell you what is going to happen instead." Mrs. Sefton had gone the color of tallow. "Your grace mistakes. She is naturally slight. The girl is sly. She does not eat what she is given. She—" "Do not." The single word cut her off like a blade. "Do not stand in this room and tell me that this girl starves herself out of slyness, madam, for I have a long memory and a longer patience for exactly that lie, and you will not like where my patience ends. I know that lie. I have heard it before in another house, about another girl, and I believed it then to my eternal shame, because I was young and it was convenient, and the woman who told it to me was as respectable seeming as you, and the girl in question is 12 years in her grave, dead at 22 of being slowly used up by people who told everyone she was merely delicate." His voice did not rise, but something behind it did, something that made Mrs. Sefton take a step back. "So you will not tell me that lie, not tonight, not about this girl. Here is what is going to happen instead, madam, and you will listen very carefully, for I shall say it only once. I am not handing her back to you. She is not returning to that floor tonight, nor any night, nor to your house, until I have satisfied myself as to exactly how a gentlewoman comes to have a scullery maid's hands and a starving woman's weight under 3 years of your Christian charity. You will go back to the ballroom. You will tell anyone who asks that Miss Brooke was taken faint, that the Duke of Hawkridge has seen her conveyed safely into the care of his grandmother, the Dowager Duchess, and that there is nothing whatever irregular in it, which there will not be, for I will see the Dowager informed within the hour, and it will be entirely true, and you will say nothing else to anyone, ever, about this girl, until you hear from me. Do you understand, Mrs. Sefton? Because I assure you that you very much wish to understand." And Mrs. Sefton, who had come into the room to reclaim her property and found instead the cold, immovable fury of a duke who had clearly decided something, understood that she had somehow, in the space of a fainting fit, lost control of a situation she had controlled completely for 3 years. And she did not understand how, and she did not understand what it would cost her, but she understood enough to be afraid, and she dropped a flustered curtsy and fled, which was the wisest thing she did that night, and very nearly the last wise thing she would do in this story at all. Adeline came back to herself slowly and wrong and afraid. The first thing she knew was that she was lying down, which was wrong. One did not lie down at a ball. And the second was that she was warm, with a coat she did not recognize laid over her, a heavy, fine man's coat that smelled of cedar and cold air. And the third, surfacing through the swimming dark, was the memory of the floor, tilting and the gold swallowing everything, and hard upon it the terror, the old reflexive terror that had governed her life for 3 years. I fainted. I have humiliated her. She will punish me. Lottie. And Adeline's eyes flew open, and she tried at once to sit, to rise, to get up and undo it, to get back onto the floor before the damage was done, and a hand, a large, warm, steady hand, pressed her shoulder gently but immovably back down. "No," said a low voice above her. "Lie still. You are quite safe, and quite finished with fainting for one evening, and you are not going anywhere at all until you have eaten something, which is coming. Lie still, Miss Brooke. There is no one here you need perform for. You may stop." Adeline turned her head and looked up at the man the voice belonged to, a tall, dark man of 35, grave and severe of feature, with gray eyes that should by rights have been cold, and were instead fixed on her, doing something she had no framework for at all. And she did not know him, and she was terrified of him, because a strange great man bending over a poor girl who had fainted was the beginning of every cautionary tale her aunt had ever told her, and because whatever was about to happen, it would be blamed on her, and the blame would fall, in the end, on Lottie. "Your Grace!" She did not know how she knew he was a Grace. Something in the bearing, the coat, the way the room arranged itself around him. "Forgive me, I am so sorry. I am quite well now. Truly, it was only the heat. I must go back. My aunt will be. Please, I must go back. If you would only let me up, I will not trouble you another moment." "Miss Brooke." He crouched so that his face was level with hers, so that she did not have to look up at him, and the small courtesy of it confused her further. "Listen to me, for I am going to tell you several true things, and I need you to hear them, because I do not think you have been told a true thing in a long time, and you have rather lost the habit of expecting them. The first true thing is that you did not faint from the heat. You fainted because you have been starved and worked past what a body can bear, and your body, being wiser than the people who have charge of it, simply stopped to save your life, which was the most sensible thing anyone in that ballroom did all evening. The second true thing is that you are not going back to that floor, not tonight, not to dance 2 more dances to please your aunt. I have already told her so, and she has gone. And you need not fear her displeasure, for whatever she does with it, she will do it to me and not to you, and I am a great deal better able to bear it." He paused. "And the third true thing, Miss Brooke, is that you are safe. I know you have no reason to believe it from a stranger, and every reason from your life to disbelieve it, and I do not ask you to believe it tonight. I only ask you to lie still and eat what is brought, and let yourself be, for one single evening, a person who is cared for rather than a person who is used. That is all. You may distrust me thoroughly while you do it, but you will do it lying down with my coat over you, because you are not getting up, Miss Brooke, and that is the one thing in this room that is not negotiable." And Adeline Brooke lay back against the sofa cushions, under the strange man's warm coat, and looked at the grave, gray-eyed stranger, who had just told her, gently and immovably, that she was safe and was not getting up. And she did the thing she had not done in 3 years, the thing she had taught herself never to do because it was useless and dangerous and changed nothing. She began helplessly to cry. She hated it. She turned her face away and tried to stop and could not stop. 3 years of held-back exhaustion and held-back grief and held-back terror came up all at once, now that someone had, for the first time, told her she might set the door down and stop holding it against the wind. And she wept as she had not wept since her mother died, in great silent shaking gasps, ashamed of every one of them, certain it would be held against her, unable to stop. And the Duke of Hawkridge did not tell her to stop. He did not pat her, or murmur, or look away in embarrassment. He simply stayed, crouched there at her level, a steady, grave presence, and when a footman came with a tray, he took it at the door so the man should not see her weeping, and he set it down within her reach, and he said only quietly, "When you are ready, there is no hurry. There is, I have decided, going to be a great deal less hurry in your life from this point onward, Miss Brooke, whether you like it or not. Cry as long as you need. The soup will keep." It was beef tea and bread and butter and a little wine, and when at last the weeping wore itself out, and Adeline, mortified, wiped her face and tried to apologize, the Duke would not hear the apology, only nodded at the tray, and she ate slowly at first, and then with a desperate concentration that told him more than her tears had, the concentration of a person who has been hungry a long time and does not quite believe the food is truly hers to finish. And he watched her eat and said nothing, and the cold thing in his chest that had been his sister's ghost all evening eased very slightly for the first time in 12 years, because here at last was a girl who weighed nothing being given something to eat, and this time, this once, he had been in time. But when the food was eaten and the worst of the faintness had passed, the fear came back, sharper now that her body was less desperate, and it came back wearing the shape of the one thing Adeline could not be moved from, and the Duke, who had thought the hard part was over, discovered that it had not yet begun. "You are very kind, Your Grace," she said, and her voice was steadier now, and there was a new resolve in it, a frightened resolve. "Kinder than anyone has been to me in a long time, and I will remember it. But I must go home to my aunt's house tonight, and I must go back to my life tomorrow, and I am asking you, begging you, not to make trouble for me. I know you mean well. I can see that you mean well, which is its own strangeness, and I have not got the measure of it. But whatever you have decided about my aunt, whatever you mean to do, you must not. You will make it worse. You will go away to your great house and feel that you have done a good thing, and I will be left behind to pay for it. And the bill, Your Grace, the bill will not be sent to me. I could bear it if it were sent to me. The bill will be sent to my sister." The Duke went very still. "Your sister." "Lottie, Charlotte, she is 11. Adeline's hands had begun to twist together in her lap, the raw, scrubbed hands he had seen under the gloves. "When our mother died, there were the two of us, and no money, and only my aunt to take us. And my aunt did not want us, and she wanted neither of us. We were a charge on her, and a charge she resented. But she took us, because the alternative was to be seen turning out her dead sister's orphans, and my aunt cares very much what is seen. And she made a kind of bargain, though she never said it aloud. She did not need to say it. I understood it within a month. The bargain is this. I work and I do not complain, and I cause no trouble and make no scandal and ask for nothing. And in exchange, Lottie is fed and clothed and kept and allowed to be a child a little longer than I was. That is the whole of it, Your Grace. I am the price of Lottie's childhood. Every grate I black, every errand I run, every dance I perform half fainting in a borrowed gown, it is all the same coin, paid over and over into the same account, and the account keeps Lottie safe. And if I cause trouble, if I make a scandal, if a duke takes an interest, if my aunt is humiliated or frightened or crossed, she will balance the account the only way she can hurt me, which is not by hurting me. It is by turning out Lottie. She has threatened it. She means it. She is not a cruel woman exactly, Your Grace. She is a frightened, grasping, small-souled woman who will do a cruel thing without a second thought if she feels her comfort threatened. And an 11-year-old girl turned out for her sister's pride is a cruel thing she would do before breakfast and feel ill-used about. So you see why I must go home and go back, and why your kindness, if you press it, will cost me the one thing I have spent 3 years buying. Let me go, Your Grace. Please. I am not being noble. I am being a sister. There is a difference, and the difference is everything." And the Duke of Hawkridge listened to this, crouched there in the candlelight, and felt the last of his cynicism burn away entirely, for he had thought he was rescuing a mistreated girl, and he was discovering instead that he was in the presence of a kind of quiet heroism he had not believed the marriage market ballroom still contained, a girl being slowly destroyed who endured it on purpose, with open eyes, as the deliberate price of a child's safety, and who was now refusing rescue not out of fear for herself, but out of love for someone smaller. And he understood that he could not simply carry her off, that his clumsy ducal fury could indeed make it worse, that the aunt held a hostage, and the hostage changed everything. He was quiet a long moment, thinking, in the careful way he thought about land and tenants and difficult problems that did not yield to force. "You are right," he said at last, "that I could make it worse, and I am glad you told me, for I was within an hour of doing exactly that. A clumsy rescue would have left you to pay a bill sent to your sister, and I have done enough harm in my life by acting on a generous impulse without thinking it through. I will not add you and your sister to that account." He looked at her. "But you have made one error, Miss Brooke, the same error your aunt is counting on you to make, which is to think that the only two choices are to go home and submit, or to be carried off and have your sister pay for it. There is a third thing. There is always a third thing, if one is willing to be patient and clever instead of loud and quick. And I have a great deal of patience and a tolerable amount of cleverness and, as it happens, considerably more power than your aunt, though she does not yet know how much. So I am going to ask you to trust me with one small thing tonight, not your whole rescue. I have not earned that, and you have no reason to grant it. Only this. Go home tonight, as you wish, but before you go, tell me your aunt's direction and Lottie's full name. And one thing more, tell me whether, if a way could be found, a way that took your sister out of your aunt's reach entirely, so that there was no hostage left for her to threaten, no bill she could send to Lottie ever again, whether, if that were arranged first, before anything else, you would then let me help you. Not carry you off. Help you. The difference, as you say, is everything. Answer me that and tell me how to reach your sister, and I will be patient and clever, and your aunt will never know there was anything to be frightened of until it is far too late for her to send any bill to anyone. Will you give me that much?" Adeline Brooke stared at him. "You would get Lottie out first," she said slowly, as though testing the words for a trick, "before anything, so that there was no hostage." "That is how one dismantles a hostage-taker, Miss Brooke," said the Duke of Hawkridge. "One does not charge the door. One quietly removes what they are holding, and then the threat is only noise. I learned a great many useless things being raised a duke. That one, it turns out, is not useless at all. Where is your sister? And will you let me begin with her?" And Adeline Brooke, who had not trusted anyone in 3 years, who had taught herself that hope was a luxury that only made the fall harder, looked at the grave, gray-eyed man who had not charged the door, but had instead, in 5 minutes, understood the whole shape of her prison better than she had ever dared explain it, and she found, against every instinct she had built to survive, that she believed him. "Ugarkjur, if you are listening by your own fire tonight, the lamp low, the dark drawn close, the day's weight finally set down, then settle in and rest a while. For the worst of the danger is past now, though not all of it, and what comes next is the slow good work of a person being mended, which is a quieter thing than a collapse, but a far better one to keep company with. I shall tell you, before the end, where in the world I picture you sitting. But first you must see how the Duke of Hawkridge kept his word, and how a girl who had forgotten she was a person remembered it, and how a man who had failed his sister was given, against all deserving, a second chance to be in time. It is worth pausing before the mending to understand the girl as she had been before the world broke her down, for she had not always been the silent drudge with the borrowed gloves, and the woman the Duke would come to love was not made by him, but only uncovered, like a thing long buried that was whole all along. Adeline Brooke had been, until she was 19, the cherished daughter of a country clergyman, a poor living but a happy one, a snug rectory with a garden running down to a stream, a father who thought his clever elder daughter the eighth wonder of the world, and educated her accordingly, teaching her Latin alongside the boys of the parish school, and arguing theology with her across the supper table, and declaring to her mother's despair and his own delight that Adeline had the best mind in the family, and it was a great pity she had not been born a boy, for she should have made a bishop. There had been books and music, and her mother's warm, crowded kitchen, and little Lottie arriving late and adored, the baby of the house, and Adeline had grown up in that snug, happy poverty, entirely secure in the one thing that matters most to a child, which is the knowledge of being loved for exactly what one is. She had been valued. She had been known. Her father had seen her sharp, glad mind and prized it, and she had grown up expecting, in the artless way of the cherished, that the world would go on seeing and prizing her, for she did not yet know that the world is not a father, Then the fever came through the parish, as fevers did, and took her mother in the spring and her father in the autumn of the same terrible year, and the snug rectory belonged to the next incumbent, and there was no money. There had never been money, only love, which the bank would not accept. And Adeline at 19 found herself with an orphaned sister of 8, no home, no income, and only one relation in the world willing to be seen to do her duty, which was her mother's sister, Mrs. Sefton. And Mrs. Sefton had looked at her dead sister's children and seen not 2 beloved girls, but 2 costs and 1 threat. The cost was obvious: 2 more mouths, 2 more backs to clothe, in a household that aspired to more than it could comfortably afford. The threat was subtler, and Adeline did not understand it for some months until she saw it operating, that Adeline at 19 was quietly lovely and unquestionably clever and unmistakably a gentleman's well-bred daughter, and that beside her, Mrs. Sefton's own daughter, Drusilla, who was none of these things, being plain and dull and spoiled, showed to disadvantage, and that Mrs. Sefton, who had pinned all her ambitions on marrying Drusilla well, could not afford a penniless niece outshining her daughter in her own drawing-room. The solution presented itself to Mrs. Sefton's small, frightened mind with the force of obvious justice. The niece must be kept down. Her cleverness must be given no scope, her loveliness no setting, her good breeding no opportunity to show. She must be made useful and kept tired and reminded daily of her dependence, and shown to the world only when society demanded it, and then in borrowed feathers that made plain her inferiority, so that she should never, ever become a rival to Drusilla, and should instead remain safely, permanently beneath. And so the cherished, clever daughter of the country rectory was made, over 3 years, into a thing that blacked grates at 4 in the morning and ate stale bread, and forgot, by slow degrees, that she had ever been prized for anything but her labor. It was not done all at once. That was the insidious part, the part that let everyone involved pretend it was not happening. It was done gradually, each small diminishment reasonable on its own, until one day Adeline looked at her own scrubbed raw hands and could not clearly remember the girl who had argued theology with her father, and concluded in the way of the slowly broken that perhaps that girl had never really existed, that perhaps she had always been only this, a useful pair of hands with no particular self attached. That was the true theft, not the labor, hard as it was, not even the hunger. The theft was of her own knowledge of her own worth, stolen so gradually she did not feel the picking of the lock until a cynical Duke caught her falling, and felt her weigh nothing, and began, without either of them understanding it yet, to give it back. He kept his word, and he did it exactly as he had promised, quietly, cleverly, beginning with Lottie. It was not difficult in the end for a duke who applied himself. The Dowager Duchess of Hawkridge, Nathaniel's grandmother, a formidable old woman of whom we shall hear more, was prevailed upon to want a young girl about the house, a sort of ward, a companion for her old age, a charity she could be seen to perform, which suited the dowager, who was fond of being seen to be generous and fonder still, beneath the performance, of actually being so. An offer was made to Mrs. Sefton, a flattering offer, framed entirely to her advantage, that the Dowager Duchess of Hawkridge wished to take the younger Brooke girl into her household to raise and educate as a gentlewoman, at the dowager's expense, as a kindness to a respectable family fallen on hard times. To Mrs. Sefton, who had never wanted Lottie and resented the cost of her, it seemed pure profit, a charge removed, an expense spared, and a grand connection to boast of into the bargain. She agreed within the day. She did not pause to wonder why a duke's grandmother should take a sudden interest in a poor relation's little sister. She was too pleased at being rid of a cost to question the source of her good fortune, which is the particular blindness of grasping people, that they cannot see a gift horse for counting its teeth in their favor. And so, within the week, Lottie Brooke was removed from Mrs. Sefton's house to the Dowager Duchess's, where she was fed and clothed, and given a governess and a warm room and the freedom to be 11 years old. And the hostage was gone, quietly, with Mrs. Sefton's own delighted consent, and Mrs. Sefton never once suspected that she had just handed away the only thing that gave her power over her niece. There was a reunion, too, that must be told, for it was the thing that mended Adeline faster than any food or rest. The morning Lottie came to the dowager's house, and the two sisters were together again, safe, for the first time in their lives without the shadow of Mrs. Sefton falling across them. Adeline had not been told the exact day Lottie would come. The Duke had arranged it quietly and meant it as a kindness, a surprise, though he had misjudged, as careful people sometimes do, how a surprise lands on a person who has learned to brace for the worst. So when Adeline, 3 days into her own strange new life of rest and plenty, heard a child's voice in the hall below, a particular voice, the voice she had sung to sleep and risen at 4 to protect and sold 3 years of her own life to keep safe, she did not at first believe it, and then she did, and she was down the stairs before she knew she had moved, and the careful, composed, mended, half-mended woman was gone entirely, and there was only a sister, flying down a strange staircase toward the one person in the world she had given everything for. Lottie ran to her. They met on the stairs and held on, and neither of them could speak for a while, and the servants discreetly found business elsewhere, and the Dowager Duchess, watching from the landing above, took out a handkerchief and was heard to mutter something about the draft. "You're so thin," Lottie said at last, pulling back to look at her sister, her child's face crumpling. "Addie, you're so thin. What did she— You never let me see. You always sent me up before supper. You said you'd eaten. You always said you'd already eaten." And the child understood all at once, with the terrible, swift comprehension of a clever 11-year-old, the thing the adult had hidden from her for 3 years, that the suppers Adeline claimed to have already eaten had been given to Lottie, that the reason Lottie had been fed and clothed and kept a child was that Adeline had paid for it out of her own body, meal by missed meal, hour by stolen hour, that the price of Lottie's protected childhood had been written, all this time, in her sister's thinning frame, and Lottie had been too young and too sheltered to read it. "You went hungry," Lottie whispered. "For me, all this time, and you never told me. You let me think we were both all right." "Addie, why didn't you tell me?" "Because there was nothing you could have done about it but worry," said Adeline, holding her sister's face in her healing hands. "And you were a child, and a child should not have to carry her sister's hunger on top of her own grief. It was mine to carry. I carried it gladly, Lottie. I want you to hear that and believe it, gladly, because every meal I gave up bought you a little more childhood, and you were worth it. You have always been worth it. You were the one good, clean thing left after Mama and Papa died, and I would have starved altogether before I let her grind you down the way she ground me. That is not a sad thing, my darling. Do not make it a sad thing. It is the one thing in 3 bad years I am proud of. I kept you whole. Look at you, 11 years old and merry and grown an inch and not afraid of anything. And that is my doing, mine, the one masterpiece of my life. And I would do every hungry day of it again without a moment's hesitation. So do not weep over my thinness. Weep, if you must weep, that we were ever in that woman's house at all. And then stop weeping, for we are out of it now, both of us, and safe. And there is a great deal of supper in this house, and I intend for both of us to eat all of it, together, every night. No more sending you up before supper. Those days are over. Come, there is a kind old duchess upstairs who wants to meet you, and a warm room that is yours, and I am told there is to be a governess. And you are going to have the childhood I bought you, the whole rest of it, out in the open this time, with your sister beside you and well fed and never going hungry for you again. We did it, Lottie. I got us out. Well, a duke got us out, in fact, which I am still adjusting to. But we are out. That is the part that matters. And the Duke of Hawkridge, who had come to see how his surprise had landed and had stopped in the doorway at the sight of the two sisters holding each other on the stairs, heard the whole of it, heard the girl who weighed nothing explain, without self-pity, that she had given her own meals to her sister for 3 years and called it the masterpiece of her life. And he stood in the doorway and found that he could not speak, and did not try, and understood that whatever he had thought he was rescuing that night on the ballroom floor, it had been something far finer and far stronger than he had known, that he had not stooped to lift a victim at all, but had been privileged without deserving it to catch a hero as she fell. Only then did the Duke move on Adeline herself, and even then he moved carefully, for a young woman's reputation was a fragile thing, and he would not save her from starvation only to ruin her by scandal. Here, too, the dowager was the instrument. It was given out that the Dowager Duchess of Hawkridge, having taken the younger Brooke girl, had been so charmed that she desired the elder sister as well, as a companion, a reader, a genteel paid position entirely respectable for a gentlewoman of reduced means. Mrs. Sefton, who had by now grasped that the Hawkridge connection was somehow making her family fashionable and was greedy for more of it, and who in any case had never valued Adeline's labor above the appearance of charity, agreed to this too, though with more reluctance, for she would miss the free drudge. But a duke's grandmother is not refused, and the position was respectable, and Mrs. Sefton consoled herself that a niece companion to a dowager duchess reflected well upon the aunt who had so charitably raised her, and she let Adeline go, so that within a fortnight of the night she had collapsed on the ballroom floor, Adeline Brooke found herself living in the Dowager Duchess of Hawkridge's townhouse, with her sister safe under the same roof, in a warm room of her own, with enough to eat and nothing to scrub, and no grates to black at 4 o'clock in the morning, and she did not for a long time know how to live in it. That was the thing the Duke had not anticipated, and that moved him most, that a person could be so thoroughly used that they forgot how to be cared for. Adeline could not stop working. She rose at 4 out of habit and was found by the scandalized servants trying to black the grates, to carry coal, to make herself useful, because usefulness was the only coin she knew, and she could not believe she was permitted to stay without paying it. She ate too little, not from slyness as her aunt had lied, but because 3 years of going hungry had taught her body to distrust plenty, and she would catch herself saving bread in her pocket against a hunger that was not coming any more. She flinched when voices were raised. She apologized for everything. She could not sit idle without anxiety. Rest felt to her like a debt accruing. And when the Dowager Duchess with rough kindness forbade her to work and ordered her simply to read and walk in the garden and recover, Adeline obeyed with the bewildered docility of a prisoner told she is free, not believing it, waiting for the catch. The work he gave her began as a kindness and became, without either of them planning it, the truest courtship in England, conducted entirely in the margins of estate accounts and the back and forth of a shared problem. It started with the steward's books. The Duke had mentioned in passing some tangle in the Hawkridge accounts that his man of business could not resolve, and Adeline, who could not yet sit idle without anxiety and seized on any task as a drowning person seizes a rope, had asked, almost shyly, whether she might look. He had let her, expecting nothing, meaning only to give the restless girl something to occupy her hands, and she had taken the ledgers away to the library and bent over them with the fierce concentration he was learning to recognize, and 3 days later had come to him with the tangle, not merely identified but unpicked, 2 errors found that had escaped a professional for a year, and a suggestion for reorganizing the whole system of accounting between the home farm and the tenant holdings that was so obviously sensible, he could not think why no one had done it before. "Where?" said the Duke of Hawkridge, staring at her neat annotations. "Did you learn to do this?" "My father taught me," said Adeline. "He had a poor living and a large family and no money, so the accounts had to be kept to the penny, or we did not eat. And he found I had a head for it, and he taught me as he taught me everything, because he held that a mind was a mind, and it was a waste to leave half of one's children untrained merely because they were girls. He used to say I should have managed the parish better than he did, and he was probably right. He was a dreadful man of business, my father, brilliant and beloved and hopeless with money, and I kept the books from the time I was 14. She paused. I had forgotten I could do this. That is the strange thing. 3 years of blacking grates, and I had quite forgotten there was anything in my head at all. It is, Your Grace, it is the oddest sensation, like finding a room in a house you live in that you had forgotten was there, full of all your own things, exactly as you left them. I had forgotten I had a mind, and here it is. It was here all along. And the Duke of Hawkridge looked at her, flushed with the pleasure of her own recovered competence, the ledger room of her mind thrown open again after 3 years locked. And he did the thing that changed everything, though it seemed at the time merely practical. He stopped giving her tasks as a kindness and started giving her work as a colleague. He brought her the real problems of the estate, the genuine tangles, and asked her genuine opinion and argued with her when he disagreed and changed his mind when she was right, which was often. He found she understood land, not romantically, as he did, but practically, shrewdly, the economics of it, the way a clergyman's daughter who had kept a poor parish afloat understood exactly how little stood between a tenant family and disaster, and exactly which small interventions prevented it. He had drained his broken fields out of sentiment. She showed him how to make the draining pay, so that he could mend more of them, so that the sentiment and the economics pulled together instead of against each other. And the home farm prospered as it never had, and the tenants grew easier, and it was Adeline's doing as much as his, and he told her so, and meant it, and paid her for it, and she kept the money in a box and looked at it sometimes. The first money she had ever earned, that was wholly hers, the physical proof that her mind was worth something in coin, and not merely in a dead father's fond opinion. "You are spoiling me for ordinary conversation," the Duke told her one evening, the two of them deep in a dispute over enclosure that had run long past when he ought to have gone home. "Do you know that? I shall never again be able to sit through a dinner-table discussion with people who agree with everything I say. You have ruined me for agreement. I find I cannot now imagine anything duller than a companion who does not argue." "Then you have been keeping very poor company," said Adeline, "for the world is full of people who will argue with you. You have simply surrounded yourself with people who depend on your goodwill and have therefore learned not to. It is the curse of the powerful, your grace, that everyone agrees with them, and so they never learn anything, and grow stupid in a velvet sort of way without noticing. You are not stupid. But you have been starved of disagreement the way I was starved of supper, and we are neither of us, I think, quite at our best when starved." She smiled. "I shall undertake to disagree with you regularly. Consider it part of my duties, the accounts, the tenants, and the keeping of you from growing stupid in a velvet way. I find I rather enjoy the last one most." And the Duke laughed and did not go home for another hour, and rode back to his own house that night, thinking that he had given a starving girl some make-work out of pity, and received in exchange the only real conversation of his adult life, and that the bargain was so lopsided in his favor that he ought to be ashamed, and was not only grateful, and increasingly, alarmingly, something rather warmer than grateful, which he was not yet ready to name, but could no longer quite pretend not to feel. It was the Duke who understood what she needed, and he understood it because he had watched it once before, with his sister, too late. He came to his grandmother's house often that month. Too often, the dowager observed with private satisfaction, for a man merely checking on a charity, and he did a thing that seemed small and was not. He gave Adeline work, not drudgery, real work, work worthy of her mind, which he had begun to suspect was considerable. He found she could write a fair, clear hand and set her to helping with his estate correspondence. He found she had a head for figures and let her check his steward's accounts, where she found 2 errors in the first week that had escaped the steward for a year. He discovered, by degrees, that beneath the starved, exhausted drudge, there was a sharp, capable, well-read woman who had been a gentleman's daughter once, educated and curious, before the world broke her down into a pair of scrubbing hands, and he gave that woman things to do that reminded her she existed, and he paid her for them properly in coin she could keep, so that for the first time in 3 years, her usefulness bought something that was hers. There was a night in the depth of the mending when the old hunger fear rose up and showed the Duke exactly how deep the damage went, and how long the healing of such a thing truly takes. It was a small thing that triggered it, as it always is with such wounds. There had been a large dinner at the dowager's, nothing to do with Adeline, merely the old lady entertaining, and the next morning a quantity of food remained, as there always is after such dinners, destined for the servants' hall and the poor basket. And a footman, clearing it, had remarked carelessly, not knowing Adeline was within hearing, that it was a shame so much good food should go to waste, that half of it would spoil before it could be eaten. And Adeline, hearing the words go to waste, had felt something seize in her chest that had nothing to do with reason. The Duke found her an hour later in the larder. She had not known he was coming. He had called early, hoping to catch her before her day filled. A servant, troubled, had directed him to the larder, and he had gone down and found Adeline, standing among the cold stores in the dim larder light, methodically, compulsively, wrapping food in cloths and hiding it, bread in her pockets, a wedge of cheese tucked into her shawl, an apple, a twist of cold meat, her movements quick and furtive and shamed, her face wet with tears she did not seem aware of, squirreling away provisions against a famine that was 3 months past and would never come again. She started violently when she saw him, and the shame on her face was terrible. "I am sorry," she said at once, her hands full of stolen bread. "I am so sorry, I do not. I heard him say it would go to waste, and I could not. Your Grace, I know there is no sense in it. I know I am safe. I know I shall be fed tomorrow and the next day and every day. My mind knows it perfectly. But something underneath my mind heard go to waste and could not bear it, could not let good food be thrown out when I have been so hungry. And I came down here, and look at me, I have been stealing food, hiding it like an animal in a house where they would give me anything I asked for the asking, and I cannot explain it or stop it, and I am so ashamed I could die. 3 months of plenty, and I am still hiding bread in my pockets. What is wrong with me? I thought I was getting better." And the Duke of Hawkridge looked at the woman he was falling in love with, standing weeping among the cold stores with her pockets full of hidden bread, mortified past bearing by a thing she could not govern. And he did not laugh, and he did not say, There, you are safe now." The useless reassurance her reasoning mind already knew, and her wounded body could not hear. He did a wiser thing. He came into the larder, and he took up a cloth himself, and he began calmly to help her wrap food. "You are not getting better wrongly," he said, working beside her. "You are getting better exactly as such things get better, which is slowly and not in a straight line, and with the body lagging years behind the mind. I know something of this. After Margaret died, I could not for a long time let a room go cold. I kept fires roaring in rooms no one used in summer, until the servants thought me mad, because some part of me underneath my mind had decided that cold was death and would not be reasoned out of it. It made no sense. I knew it made no sense. It took years to fade, and it faded not by my fighting it, but by my living, slowly, in a world where rooms could be cold and no one died of it, until my body at last believed what my mind had always known. Yours will do the same. The fear that good food might be lost lives in your body now, not your reason, and you cannot argue a body out of a thing it learned through 3 years of hunger. You can only let it slowly relearn through 3 years or however long it takes of plenty that the famine is over, so we will not fight it." He tied off a parcel. "Here is what we will do instead. You will have a store, a real one, your own, in your own room, that no one will touch or remark on or take from you, bread and cheese and whatever keeps replenished whenever you like, entirely yours, so that the part of you that needs to know there is food laid by may know it, may see it and touch it, and be eased, not hidden, not stolen, not shameful, yours openly by right. And in time, when your body has had long enough to believe the famine is truly over, you will find you stop needing the store, and one day you will notice it has sat untouched for a month, and you will give it to the poor basket without a pang, and that will be the day you are healed, not before, and there is no hurrying it, and there is no shame in any of it. You were starved, Adeline, by people who should have fed you. The hiding of bread is not your weakness. It is the scar their cruelty left, and a scar is not a sin. And you will no more be ashamed of it in my presence than a soldier should be ashamed of a wound got in a war he did not start. Now, shall we carry this up to your room, and lay in your store, and have done with hiding things in larders forever?" And Adeline Brooke, standing among the cold stores with her pockets full of bread and her face wet with shame, looked at the man who had just met the most humiliating moment of her recovery, not with pity nor with reassurance, but with a wedge of cheese and a plan, and the steady news that her body's terror was a scar and not a failing. And she understood in that larder, more completely than any speech in any library could have told her, exactly what kind of man the Duke of Hawkridge was, and exactly how safe she was with him, and exactly why the experiment was going to conclude the way she had predicted. For a man who helps you wrap your stolen bread without a word of judgment and gives the shame a name that is not yours to carry is a man a woman may trust with the whole of herself, scars and all, for the rest of her life. You are mending her," the Dowager Duchess observed to him one evening, watching Adeline read aloud by the fire with Lottie leaning sleepily against her, the color come back into her face at last, the sharp bones softening, the flinch gone from her shoulders, "like one of your broken fields, draining the bad and feeding the good and waiting. I have watched you do it to land for years. I did not know you could do it to a person." She fixed her grandson with a shrewd old eye. "The question, Nathaniel, which I shall ask once and then leave you in peace, is whether you are mending her because of Margaret, because she is the sister you could not save, and saving her now eases an old debt, or whether you are mending her because of her, Adeline, the woman by the fire, whom I have watched you watch in a manner that has nothing to do with your dead sister at all. It matters which, you know. It will matter a great deal to that girl who has been wanted for her usefulness her whole life and will not survive being wanted as someone else's redemption. So you had best be sure which it is. I shall say no more." And the Duke of Hawkridge, who had not let himself ask the question in those words, sat with it long into the night, and did not like how hard it was to answer, and understood that his grandmother, as usual, had put her old finger on the exact place that hurt. The Dowager Duchess of Hawkridge deserves a fuller account, for she was the engine of a great deal of what happened, and she did it largely for her own reasons, which were not the reasons the world supposed. She was 83, and she had outlived a husband, 2 sons, and most of her contemporaries, and she had reached the age and the eminence at which a woman may do precisely as she pleases and dare anyone to remark on it, which she enjoyed enormously. She had agreed to take Lottie and then Adeline, ostensibly, as a charity and a convenience to her grandson, but the Dowager did very little purely as a charity, and she had her own purposes, and the chief of them was this. She had watched her grandson freeze slowly for 12 years, ever since his sister Margaret died, and she had grieved it nearly as much as she grieved the girl, for the Dowager had loved Margaret too. Margaret had been her granddaughter, and she had failed her too. She had let the marriage happen, had told herself the older man was respectable, and the match advantageous, and that Margaret would settle, had looked away, exactly as Nathaniel had looked away, only from the greater height and the greater knowledge of an adult who ought to have known better. The Dowager carried her own portion of that guilt, larger than she ever let her grandson see, for she had had the power to stop the marriage and had not used it, and Margaret had died, and the Dowager had watched her grandson take the whole weight of a blame that was at least half hers, and had not been able to lift any of it from him, because to lift it she would have had to confess her own part, and she had been too proud for 12 years to do so. So when Nathaniel came to her, the night after the ball, asking her to take a starving girl's sister into her house, the Dowager Duchess had understood at once what she was looking at, and her old heart had turned over. She had seen her frozen grandson move to swift action for the first time in 12 years. She had heard, in the careful way he described the girl, the unmistakable note of a man who had found something he could not walk away from. And she had thought, here it is. Here is the thaw I had stopped praying for. Here is the second chance, not only for the girl, but for him, and perhaps, God willing, for me. And she had thrown the whole weight of her wealth and her position and her formidable will behind the rescue, not as a charity, but as an old woman's desperate gamble that the saving of this girl might, by some grace she did not deserve, undo a little of the failing of the last one. She watched them both, that spring, with the fierce attention of a woman who has wagered her own peace on the outcome. She watched Adeline mend. She watched Nathaniel come to the house too often, and linger too long, and look at the girl in the way she had despaired of ever seeing him look at anyone. And one evening, finding Adeline alone in the library, the dowager did a thing she had not planned and surprised herself by doing. She told the girl the truth about Margaret, and about her own guilt, before Nathaniel ever did. "I tell you this," the old woman said, "because you are clever enough to need to know it, and because my grandson will tell you his half of it and leave out mine, for he is a generous fool who has carried my share of this blame for 12 years, and never once let me see that he knows it is mine to carry. He thinks he failed Margaret alone. He did not. I failed her first, and worse, for I was old enough to know better, and he was a boy. I let her be married to a cold man for an advantageous reason, because I told myself it was sensible, and I looked away from what it did to her, because looking was painful, and she died of it. And I have let my grandson believe the whole fault was his, because I was too proud to confess mine." The dowager's ancient hands gripped the arms of her chair. "I am telling you, child, so that when he gives you his half, you will know there is another half, and that the freezing of that man is not only grief but guilt, and that what is thawing him is not only you, but the chance to do for once the thing we both failed to do for Margaret, to be in time. Do not mistake it for less than it is, and do not, this is the thing I most wish to say, do not imagine, when you learn it, that you are merely Margaret's replacement, the second chance, the redemption. You are not. I have watched you. You are a person in your own right, a clever, brave person who is mending herself with very little help from any of us. And my grandson loves you for yourself, though he is too tangled in his old grief to be sure of it yet. I am sure of it. I am 83, and I have watched a great many people love a great many others, and I know the difference between a man easing a debt and a man losing his heart, and my grandson is losing his heart, child, whatever he tells himself. Be patient with him while he works it out. And be patient with an old woman who failed one granddaughter and is gambling everything she has left on not failing the girl who might become another. And Adeline, who had thought herself the only one in that house carrying a buried grief, understood that the whole house was built over the same grave, and that she had walked, all unknowing, into a family's long penance, and been made, without anyone quite intending it, the unlikely hope of 3 wounded people at once, herself and the Duke, and this fierce, honest, broken old woman who had just trusted her with the things she had hidden for 12 years. He told her about Margaret on a wet afternoon in the library because she asked, and because he had reached the point, without quite noticing he had reached it, of being unable to refuse Adeline Brooke anything she asked. She had asked gently. She had grown over the weeks of mending from the flinching, frightened drudge into something much closer to the woman she had been born to be, and that woman was perceptive, and she had not failed to notice the thing that flickered across the Duke's grave face at certain moments, when she ate, when she was tired, when she spoke of having been hungry, a shadow that was not quite pity and was clearly old. "You look at me sometimes," she said, "as though I were someone else, someone you are afraid for. I have wondered who. You need not tell me. I know I have no right to ask a duke his private griefs. But you have given me back my life, your grace, and my sister's, and I find I should like to know the man who did it, and not only be known by him, for it is a lopsided sort of acquaintance otherwise, all your knowing of me and none of my knowing of you, and I have had enough of being the only one in a room who may not speak." So he told her. "I had a sister," said the Duke of Hawkridge, "Margaret. She was 4 years older than I, and she half raised me, for our mother was an invalid, and our father was absent, in the way of fathers who have an heir, and consider the work done. Margaret was the warmth of my childhood. She was clever and merry and kind, and she had a laugh that— He stopped and went on. When she was 17, our father married her off. It was a good match by his reckoning, an older man, very rich, very respectable, who wanted a young wife to ornament his house and give him sons. Margaret did not want him. She told our father so. She came to me, I was 13, and wept, and said she could not bear it, that there was no warmth in the man, that she would be a possession and not a wife. And I was 13, and I told her it would be all right, that father knew best, that she would grow used to it. I gave her the comfort children give, which is no comfort at all, only a wish for the trouble to go away. And she was married, and she went to that cold, rich house, and I was sent to school, and I did not see the rest. I only got the letters. They grew thinner and thinner, her letters, fewer words, less of her in them. And when I came home in the holidays and saw her, she was thinner too, and quieter, and the laugh was gone. And when I asked our mother, she said Margaret was merely delicate, that married women had these vapors, that it was nothing. I believed it. It was convenient to believe it. I was a boy who wanted his sister to be all right, and the grown people I trusted told me she was. And so I did not look closely, did not ask the hard questions, did not see that she was being slowly used up, neglected, unloved, worked at the business of being an ornament and a breeder until there was nothing left of the merry, clever girl who had raised me. She died at 22. They said it was a low fever. I have always known it was not. I have always known she died of being unwanted, of being a possession that had ceased to amuse, of having the warmth slowly starved out of her by a household that valued her exactly as much as your aunt valued you, and that I, who loved her more than anyone living, looked away, because the looking was hard and the lie was easy, and let her die a mile from my own school without once fighting for her. The library was very quiet. The rain ran down the tall windows. "So when I saw you go down on that floor," he said, "weighing nothing, performing health you did not have, with a respectable woman at your elbow ready to tell me you were merely delicate, Adeline, I did not lift you out of pity. I lifted you because for one instant, crossing that ballroom, you were Margaret. You were the second chance I had stopped praying for, because I had stopped believing in second chances. And I swore, before you had even opened your eyes, that this time I would not look away. This time I would ask the hard questions and fight the easy lie. This time I would be in time. That is the truth, and you are owed the truth. And now you have it." He looked at her, and his gray eyes were not cold at all. "But my grandmother, who misses nothing, has put a question to me that I must now put to you, for it would be a coward's kindness to spare you it. She asked me whether I am mending you, because you are the sister I could not save, a debt I am paying to a ghost, or because of you, the woman you are, who is not Margaret and never was. And I have sat with that question a great many nights, Adeline, because you above all people must not be wanted as someone else's redemption. You have been wanted for your usefulness your whole life, and it has nearly killed you, and to be wanted now as my private penance would be only the same wound dressed in kinder clothes. So I owe you the answer, and here it is, as honestly as I know how to give it." He drew a breath. "It began as Margaret. I will not lie to you. That first night it was Margaret, the old grief and the old debt. But it has not been Margaret for some weeks now, and I knew the exact day it stopped being her, and I shall tell you which day so you may believe me. It was the day you found the second error in my steward's accounts and looked up at me with such fierce delight at having caught it, such pure, unguarded pleasure in your own cleverness, a thing Margaret never had, that sharp, glad mind that was only ever yours. And I thought, I do not want to save this woman. I want to know what she thinks about everything in the world for the rest of my life. That is not a debt to a ghost, Adeline. A ghost does not make you want to argue with someone about crop rotation until 2 in the morning. You stopped being Margaret the day I started loving you for the entirely separate and inconvenient fact of being yourself. And I have been trying to find the courage to say so ever since, and my grandmother's hard question has finally pried it out of me, for which I shall have to thank her, though it galls me." Adeline did not answer him at once. She sat with it, with the dead sister and the second chance, and the day in the accounts, and the inconvenient separate fact of being herself, and the Duke let her sit with it, having learned by now that she thought before she spoke, and that the thinking was worth waiting for. "I believe you," she said at last, slowly. "That is the strange thing. I have spent 3 years not believing anyone, and I find I believe you, because you did not give me the easy answer. The easy answer was, of course it is you, it was always you, never the ghost. And you did not give it? You told me it began as Margaret, which does not flatter me and is therefore probably true, and then you told me the exact day it changed and what changed it, which no one inventing a kindness would think to do. So I believe you." She looked down at her hands, healed now, soft again, a lady's hands once more. "And I must tell you in fairness, since we are trading hard truths, that I have been afraid of exactly that question from the other side. Not whether you wanted me as your sister's ghost. I did not know about your sister until today. I was afraid of something smaller and meaner. I was afraid that you wanted me because you had saved me, because a man who rescues a starving girl and feeds her and mends her becomes attached to his own rescue, fond of the thing he has fixed, the way one is fond of a field one has drained or a horse one has nursed, and that what I felt as warmth from you was only the warmth a man feels toward his own good deed. And I could not bear that, your grace, any more than you could bear my being your penance, for it is the same wound, is it not? Only mine. To be loved as a rescue is only another way of being loved for one's usefulness. It is being useful in reverse, useful as the object of someone's goodness rather than the subject of their need. But it is the same coin, and I have spent my whole life being paid in that coin. And I find I want, just once, before I die, to be wanted as a person, and not as a transaction of any kind, neither drudge nor ward nor rescue nor redemption. So your grandmother's question cuts both ways, and I have been bleeding from my side of it for weeks." "Then let me answer your side too," said the Duke, "with the same honesty, for you have earned it." He leaned forward. "It is true that I saved you, and it is true that a man grows fond of what he mends. I will not pretend that played no part. But here is how I know it is not the whole, nor even the most of it, and you may test the proof yourself, for it is a proof you are uniquely placed to check. Adeline, you no longer need saving. Look at yourself. You are well, you are fed, you are safe, your sister is safe. You have a respectable position and money of your own and the protection of my grandmother, who would take on the whole of London on your behalf and enjoy it. The rescue is complete. There is nothing left to fix, no field left to drain, no good deed left to perform. If my warmth toward you were only fondness for my own rescue, it would be fading now as the rescue concludes. A man's interest in a fixed thing wanes once it is fixed, and mine is not waning. Mine grows stronger every week that you need me less, which is the precise opposite of what would happen if you were merely my good deed. I do not want you, because you are broken, and I can mend you. I want you most on exactly the days you are strongest, the days you need nothing from me at all, the days you argue with me and best me and stride about my grandmother's garden full of opinions and health, with not the smallest trace left of the girl who fainted on a floor. That is how you may know, Adeline, not by my word which you are right to distrust, but by the direction of the thing. A rescuer's love fades as the rescue completes, and mine has done nothing but deepen. Watch it. Test it. Need me less and less, as you are already doing, and see whether I love you less, and you will find I love you more, and then you will have your proof in the one currency you trust, which is evidence rather than promises. And Adeline Brooke looked at the Duke of Hawkridge, who had answered the meanest fear she had, the fear she had been too ashamed to speak, not with reassurance but with a falsifiable proof, an experiment she could run herself, designed precisely for a woman who had learned to trust evidence over words. And she felt the last knot of her long weariness begin, slowly, to loosen, because no one fond merely of their own good deed would ever think to say need me less and watch me love you more. "That is a very strange and very clever thing to say to a woman," she said unsteadily, "and I find it has undone me rather more thoroughly than any pretty speech could have. You have a gift, Your Grace, for saying the one true thing that gets past all a person's defenses, because it does not try to get past them. It simply tells the truth and trusts the person to be intelligent enough to check it. I have never been trusted to be intelligent before. It is, I find, the most romantic thing that has ever happened to me, which says a great deal about how unromantic my life has been, and also a great deal about you." She drew a breath and met his eyes, and chose to be brave. "I will run your experiment. I will need you less and less on purpose and watch what your heart does, because I am a careful woman and I trust evidence. But I will tell you now what I expect the evidence to show, so that you may check it against your own heart and tell me if I am wrong. I expect to find that the less I need you, the more I simply want you, not as a rescuer, not as a refuge, but as the one person in the world I should like to argue with about everything until we are both very old. And I expect to find that you want the same. And I expect that we shall both be too stubborn and too wary and too marked by our griefs to say so plainly for some weeks yet, and shall circle it, and test it, and gather our evidence. And then, one ordinary day, having proved it to both our satisfactions, we shall stop being clever about it, and simply admit that the experiment has concluded, and the result is not in doubt. That is what I expect the evidence to show, Your Grace. I am usually right about evidence. We shall see." She spent her first earned money on Lottie, and it was a small thing, and it undid the Duke entirely when he learned of it, though she had not meant him to. It happened quietly. Adeline had been paid for her work on the accounts. Real coin, properly earned, the first wages of her own life. And she had kept it in a box, looking at it sometimes, not quite believing it. And one day, walking out with Lottie, she had stopped at a shop window where there was a doll, a fine one, the sort of thing Lottie had not had since the rectory, since before everything, and she had seen her sister's face as she looked at it, not asking, never asking. Lottie had learned not to ask for things in the Sefton house, only looking, with the wistful, careful longing of a child who has trained herself not to want what she cannot have. And Adeline had gone in and bought it with her own earned money and given it to her sister there in the street. "But it's so dear," Lottie protested, even as she clutched it, torn between longing and the hard, frugal caution 3 years had taught even a child. "Addie, you shouldn't. It's too much. We should save—" "It is my own money," said Adeline, "earned with my own mind, doing real work, and it is mine to spend exactly as I please, and I please to spend it on a doll for my sister who has not had a new thing that was only for her, only for joy and not for use in 3 years. We are done saving against famine, Lottie. The famine is over. I have a store of bread in my room and money in a box and a position and a future, and I find I want, more than I have wanted anything, to buy you one beautiful, useless, joyful thing, because you went without for 3 years so that I might keep you fed, though you did not know that was the bargain, and you deserve one thing that is purely for delight. So it is bought, and it is yours, and you will not give it back nor feel guilty over it, for it is the first thing I have ever bought with money I earned myself, and I cannot think of anything I would rather have spent it on. Take the doll, my darling. Let us learn, both of us, how to have nice things again. We are out of practice. We had better begin." It was the dowager who told the Duke of it, having had it from Lottie, who told everyone, and the Duke, hearing how Adeline had spent the very first wages of her recovered life, not on herself, not on a single thing for the woman who had gone without for 3 years, but on one beautiful, useless, joyful thing for the sister she had starved to protect, found that he had to stand at the window a moment with his back to the room. She bought nothing for herself, he said, when he could. 3 years starved, and the first money she ever earns, and she buys a doll for the child. Of course she did. Of course that is what she did. He turned back, and his voice was not quite steady. Grandmother, I have spent 12 years believing the great tragedy of my life was that I could not save Margaret. And I begin to think the tragedy was smaller and stranger than that I have been so busy mourning the one I could not save that I nearly missed the chance to simply love one I could. That a man may turn even his grief into a kind of selfishness, a way of being about himself, his guilt, his second chance, his redemption, when the woman in front of him is not a chance to redeem anything but only simply herself, a person spending her first wages on her sister's doll, asking nothing, owed everything. I do not want to redeem myself through her. I want to buy her 1,000 useless, joyful things and watch her learn to have nice things again. That is all. That is the whole of what I want. When did it become so simple? It was so complicated for so long. It became simple, said the Dowager Duchess with great satisfaction, the moment you stopped making it about Margaret and started making it about her, which you have just done out loud in front of me at last. Go and propose to that girl, Nathaniel. Buy her 1,000 useless things. You have my blessing, and Margaret's too, I should think, wherever she is. For the best memorial to a girl no one saved in time is a girl who is saved in time and loved for herself, and allowed to buy her sister a doll. Go on. You have grieved long enough. Go and be happy. It is, I promise you, allowed. Lottie, meanwhile, was doing a great deal of the work of healing that no adult could do, simply by being 11 and merry and entirely unguarded. For children mend the broken in ways that grown people, with all their careful kindness, cannot manage. She had taken to the Duke of Hawkridge at once, and without the smallest awe, which delighted the Dowager and disconcerted the Duke, who was not accustomed to being treated as an ordinary person by anyone, let alone a child. Lottie did not know he was supposed to be cold and severe. No one had told her, and so she simply behaved as though he were a large, kind, useful man who had appeared in her life to make things better, which was, after all, exactly what he had been. And she made claims on him accordingly, demanding to be told about his estates and his horses and whether he had ever fallen off one, informing him of her own opinions on a wide range of subjects, and most disconcerting of all, thanking him, frequently and matter-of-factly, for things, in a way that got past his defenses entirely because it was so artless. "Thank you for getting Addie out," she said to him one afternoon, having tracked him down in the Dowager's garden with the directness of a child who has decided something must be said. "She won't say it properly because she's proud, and she thinks she has to do everything herself, but I will say it for both of us. You got her out. Do you know she was dying?" "I didn't know when we were there. She hid it from me. She hid everything from me. She always said she'd already eaten, but I know now. I worked it out. She was giving me her supper for 3 years, and getting thinner and thinner, and she would have died of it eventually. Properly died. And I'd have been left all alone, and you came along and caught her and got us both out, and now she's getting better, and we're safe. And it's because of you. So, thank you. That's all. I just thought somebody should say it to your face, because grown-ups are silly about saying things to faces, and I'm not yet because I'm only 11. She considered him. "Are you going to marry her? You look at her the way Papa used to look at Mama. I remember it. I was little, but I remember. I should like it very much if you married her, because then we'd all be a family again, and Addie would be happy. And she hasn't been happy in such a long time. And I think you'd make her happy. And I've been watching. And I think she'd make you happy, too, because you don't look so frozen when she's in the room. You should marry her. I've thought about it a great deal, and I'm quite sure." And the Duke of Hawkridge, faced with an 11-year-old who had just thanked him for saving her sister's life and then calmly advised him to marry her, found himself entirely without his usual defenses, and answered the child with a directness he would not have managed with any adult. "I should like to marry her very much, Lottie," he said, more than I have ever wanted anything. But it is your sister's choice, not mine, and she has had a great many things in her life chosen for her by other people, and I will not be one more person who decides her life without asking. So I am waiting and being patient until she is well enough and free enough and sure enough to choose for herself, knowing she could choose otherwise, knowing she needs nothing from me. I want her to pick me freely or not at all. Does that make sense to you? I do not want to be her rescue. I want to be her choice." Lottie considered this with the grave seriousness of a child weighing an important matter. "That's a good answer," she pronounced at last. "That's better than I expected, actually. Most people would just say yes or no. You said you'd wait until she could choose freely, which is exactly right because she's never got to choose anything, and she should get to choose this. It's the most important thing. She absolutely should get to choose it herself." She nodded, satisfied. "All right, I approve. I wasn't sure I would because I'm very protective of Addie, but you passed. You can marry her if she'll have you, and I think she will because she looks at you the same way you look at her. Only she thinks nobody notices because she's being careful, but I notice because I notice everything. And I'm telling you so you don't lose heart while you're being patient. She likes you. A lot. There. Now I've helped both of you. You may thank me at the wedding." And she went off about her own 11-year-old business, leaving the Duke of Hawkridge standing in the garden, comprehensively outmaneuvered by a child, and more hopeful than he had let himself feel in 12 years, and thinking that the Brooke sisters between them had, in the space of a single spring, thawed something in him that he had believed frozen past any thawing, and that he would spend the rest of his life, if they let him, in the warmth of it. The evidence, as Adeline had predicted, came in steadily over the following weeks, all of it pointing the same way, and they might have gone on gathering it gently and circling toward their conclusion at their own careful pace, had Mrs. Sefton not discovered, too late and to her fury, exactly what she had given away. There was a confrontation, before the public one, that the world never saw, a private reckoning between Adeline and her aunt, some weeks into the new life when Mrs. Sefton, having grasped at last what she had given away, came to the dowager's house to try to claw it back, and it revealed, more than any ballroom speech, how far Adeline had traveled from the girl who had blacked the grates in silence. Mrs. Sefton came uninvited, of course, on a pretext of visiting, and contrived to get Adeline alone in a morning room before the dowager could be summoned to prevent it, and there, dropping all pretense, she went to work with the only tools she had ever possessed, which were guilt and fear and the long habit of command over a niece who had never been permitted to answer back. "I see how it is," said Mrs. Sefton, her eyes raking the fine room, Adeline's good gown, the soft, healed hands. "Very comfortable, very pleased with ourselves, living off a duchess's charity and casting eyes at a duke after everything I did for you. 3 years I housed you, fed you, clothed you, raised your sister." "Starved me," said Adeline, "worked me, kept me down so I should not outshine Drusilla. Let us use the true words, Aunt, now that there are no grates between us. We both know which they are." Mrs. Sefton blinked, unaccustomed to interruption. "How dare you, after my charity?" "I have been thinking about your charity a great deal," said Adeline, and she did not raise her voice, and she did not tremble, and she watched her aunt grow uneasy at the steadiness of her. "Lying in a warm bed with enough to eat, with my mind coming back to me a little more each day, I have had leisure to think, which is a thing you never allowed me, for you understood, cleverer in this than in anything, that a tired, hungry person has no leisure to think, and a person who cannot think cannot judge their own situation, and a person who cannot judge their situation can be kept in it. That was the genius of your cruelty, Aunt. You did not merely work me and starve me. You kept me too exhausted to understand that I was being worked and starved, so that I half believed I deserved it, that it was the natural order, that a poor relation owed her keep in labor, and a slender figure was a kindness, and a girl who fainted was sly. You stole my judgment along with my suppers, And the cruelest part is that I do not think you even planned it. I think you are not clever enough to have planned it. I think you simply did by instinct every small thing that kept me down and called it charity, and believed yourself ill-used because that is the kind of creature you are, one who does cruelty by instinct and feels herself the injured party throughout. She rose. And now you have come to claw me back, because you have understood that the drudge is about to rise above you, which is the one thing your whole treatment of me was designed to prevent. But you cannot claw me back, Aunt. Do you know why? Not because of the Duke, not because of the Duchess, because of the one thing you stole that you cannot unsteal now that I have it back, my judgment. I can think again. I am fed and rested, and my mind is my own once more, and a person whose mind is her own cannot be guilted or frightened back into a cage, because she can see the cage for what it is. You have no power over me now, none, and you never will again, because power over me was only ever exhaustion and hunger and the theft of my own judgment, and all three are ended. You are talking to a woman who can think, Aunt. You have never done that before. You will find it does not go the way talking to me used to go. Mrs. Sefton's face worked. She reached desperately for her last weapon. Your sister is beyond you, as you well know, in this very house, under a duchess's protection, with a governess and a future. You gave her up yourself gladly to save the cost of her. You have no hostage left, Aunt. You gave away your own leverage in a fit of greed, and the loss of it is the loss of everything, and I think somewhere underneath you have begun to understand that, which is why you are here, scrabbling, with nothing left to scrabble with. Adeline moved to the door and opened it, a clear dismissal, a thing she could never have done in the old house. I will tell you the truth, Aunt, since we are at last speaking the truth, and then you will go. I do not hate you. I thought I would when I was free enough to feel it, but I find I do not. I pity you. You had 2 orphan nieces handed into your care, 2 girls who would have loved you had you let them, who would have been a comfort to your old age, who came to you with nothing but need and the capacity for gratitude. And you looked at that, at 2 children who might have loved you, and you saw only cost and threat, and you chose to make a drudge of one and a stranger of the other, and you got in the end exactly the family you built, one that does not love you, that is glad to be free of you, that will not visit you in the country where you are going. You could have had daughters, Aunt. You chose to have servants and rivals, and now you are alone with Drusilla, who is exactly as you raised her to be, and you will grow old in a house with no love in it, having had the chance at love and traded it for the small, mean pleasure of keeping a clever girl down. That is your punishment, and it is a heavier one than any court could give, and you built it yourself brick by brick every morning you sent me to the grates. Go home, Aunt. There is nothing for you here. There never could have been after what you chose. Go home to the cold house you made. And Mrs. Sefton, who had come to reclaim her power and found it gone past recovering, looked at the niece she no longer recognized, the steady, fed, clear-eyed woman where the silent drudge had been, and found she had nothing to say, no weapon left, no purchase anywhere on a person who could think again. And she gathered herself and went in a silence that was its own confession, and the private reckoning was over, and Adeline stood a long moment in the morning room afterward, not triumphant, only quiet, feeling the last chain fall away. Not the chain of her aunt's power, which was already broken, but the older chain, the one inside, the half-belief that she had somehow deserved it. For in saying the truth aloud to the woman's face, she had at last fully believed it herself, and a woman who knows all the way down that she did not deserve her cage is a woman who can never be caged again. For Mrs. Sefton was not in the end a stupid woman, only a greedy and a frightened one, and greed and fright between them eventually did the arithmetic that her initial delight had skipped. She had handed over both her nieces to the house of Hawkridge in a glow of self-congratulation at being rid of 2 costs and gaining a grand connection. But as the weeks passed, and the connection did not flower into the invitations and consequence she had imagined, For the Hawkridges, it turned out, had taken her nieces but had no intention of taking her, and as the gossip began to reach her, the gossip that the Duke of Hawkridge was at his grandmother's house a very great deal, and that the elder Brooke girl was uncommonly often in his company, and that there was beginning to be talk, Mrs. Sefton understood all at once what had happened. She had not performed a charity and gained a connection. She had been quietly, cleverly stripped of both her nieces by a duke who wanted one of them, and she had consented to every step of it herself, delighted, like a woman handing over her purse to a thief because he complimented her gloves. And the elder niece, the drudge, the cost, the girl Mrs. Sefton had kept carefully beneath her for 3 years, that girl was now apparently on the verge of becoming a duchess, of rising so far above her aunt that the whole careful order of Mrs. Sefton's world would be turned upside down, the poor relation become the great lady, the charity child become the patroness. It was intolerable to her. It was the precise nightmare her whole treatment of Adeline had been designed to prevent, and Mrs. Sefton, frightened and furious and feeling herself made a fool of, did the thing that frightened, furious, foolish people do. She resolved to pull down what she could no longer control. She could not now threaten Lottie. Lottie was beyond her reach, safe in the dowager's house. So she reached for the only weapon left to a woman in her position against a girl in Adeline's, which was scandal. And she chose, with a low cunning, to deploy it publicly at the largest gathering she could contrive to attend, calculating that the Hawkridges' very desire to avoid scandal would force them to abandon Adeline rather than fight it. She would stand up before the fashionable world and tell a story, that her ungrateful niece, whom she had charitably raised, had thrown herself at the Duke of Hawkridge, had schemed and entrapped him, had repaid 3 years of a good aunt's charity by running off to a duke's household to play the seductress. That the girl was no innocent victim, but a grasping fortune hunter who had feigned her very collapse to win a duke's sympathy, and that any respectable family must shun her. It was a poisonous story, and it had just enough of the shape of the truth bent backward to be plausible to people who wished to believe it, and Mrs. Sefton polished it and waited for her moment, which came at a great ball some weeks later, a ball the Dowager Duchess attended, with both Brooke sisters in her train, Adeline restored now to full health, and dressed at last in a gown that fit and gloves that hid nothing because there was nothing to hide. Mrs. Sefton sprang it at the height of the evening, in a crowded room, in a caring voice, exactly as she had planned. And I think it only right that people should know, she was saying, to a gathering knot of the avid and the idle, loud enough to carry, with Adeline standing not 10 feet away and the whole room beginning to turn. What manner of girl she truly is, for I raised her, I know her, and I will not see good people deceived. She threw herself at his grace. She feigned that fainting fit. Oh yes, feigned it, the sly creature. She was never delicate a day in her life. She ate me out of house and home, feigned it to be carried off and play upon his sympathy. And now she has wormed her way into the dowager's household and means to trap a duke into marriage. She, a penniless nobody, my own sister's child, whom I clothed and fed for 3 years out of pure Christian charity, and who repays me thus. It is the basest ingratitude It is the basest something, certainly, said Adeline Brooke, stepping forward into the center of the room, clear and calm and unhurried. Though I do not think the word you want is ingratitude. Pray go on, Aunt. You had got as far as the Christian charity. Do please tell the company about the Christian charity. I should like them to hear about it. I should like them to hear about it very much. Tell them what time the charity began of a morning. Tell them what the charity gave a growing girl to eat. Tell them about the borrowed gloves, Aunt, and why a gentlewoman in your charitable care had the hands of a scullery maid underneath them. You have begun the story. Finish it. The company is all attention. I will not interrupt again. Tell them everything. I find, after 3 years of silence, that I am no longer in the least afraid of the truth, and I should so love to hear you try to tell it. The room had gone utterly silent. Mrs. Sefton's mouth opened and shut. You You wicked, ungrateful— Mrs. Sefton floundered, for she had not expected the drudge to speak at all, let alone to speak like this, clear and fearless, and turning the weapon in her hand. You dare. I dare a great deal more than I used to, Aunt. It is wonderful what regular meals will do for a girl's daring. Adeline turned, not to her aunt now, but to the silent staring room, and she spoke to them, simply, without heat, the way one states a fact. My aunt has told you I feigned my collapse. Let me tell you how I came to collapse, and you may decide between us which of us the company believes. On the day I fainted, I had risen at 4 a.m. to black the grates and carry the coal and scrub the steps of my aunt's house, where for 3 years I was kept not as a niece, but as an unpaid servant, worked from before dawn and given, in the way of food, whatever was thought sufficient to keep a girl slender, which was not sufficient to keep her standing. I had eaten a heel of stale bread that day. I had run 3 errands on foot in the cold, and then I was laced into a borrowed gown and sent out to dance, to keep up the appearance of a family that brought out all its girls, and I danced until my starved, exhausted body did the only sensible thing left to it and stopped. The Duke of Hawkridge did not rescue a schemer that night. He caught a girl who weighed nothing, whose hands under the borrowed gloves were burned and broken from a grate, and who fainted not from artifice but from the plain bodily fact of being slowly used up by the very aunt, now standing before you calling it Christian charity and ingratitude. She let that settle into the silent room. As for entrapping a duke, Aunt, I have not the smallest power to entrap anyone, and we both know it, and so does every clever person here, for a penniless girl does not trap a duke. A duke does precisely as he pleases, being a duke, and any woman who imagines otherwise has never met one. If his grace has shown me kindness, it is his kindness and his choosing, not my contriving, and you insult him as much as me by suggesting a starving girl somehow maneuvered a Duke of Hawkridge against his will. He is not so weak, nor I so cunning. The truth is far simpler and far less flattering to your story. He saw cruelty being done, and he stopped it because he is that rare and inconvenient thing, a powerful man who uses his power to mend what is broken rather than to keep it broken. And you cannot forgive him for it, because his mending of me exposes your breaking of me, and you would rather pull us both down into scandal than be seen for what you are. That is the whole of it. I am not ashamed of one word of my story. Are you ashamed of yours? You have only to finish telling it, and we shall know. It was at this point that the Duke of Hawkridge, who had been standing at the edge of the room watching Adeline do what he would have charged in to do for her, and was discovering with a fierce pride that surprised him that she did not need him to, cross the silent floor to her side. And he did not speak in her defense, for she had not needed defending. He simply came and stood beside her, and faced the room with her, and let the meaning of a duke standing publicly at a penniless girl's shoulder speak for itself, which it did eloquently to a room that knew exactly how to read such things. Mrs. Sefton, he said into the ringing silence, you have asked the company to believe that your niece is a grasping fortune hunter who feigned a collapse and entrapped me. I will save the company the trouble of weighing it. I was the one who caught her. I felt what 3 years of your charity had done to her body. I saw the hands your gloves hid. I have the evidence of my own arms, which have held both starving women and well-fed ones, and know the difference past any lie you can tell. So I am the one witness in this room who cannot be deceived about that night, and I tell you plainly before all these people that everything your niece has said is true, and everything you have said is false, and that I will repeat it under oath in any court in England you care to drag this into, and that you very much do not wish to drag it into a court, Mrs. Sefton, for the discovery process would be most illuminating, and I have a great many lawyers, and you have a great many things to hide. His voice was very cold and very level. You came here tonight to ruin her with a scandal, calculating that my family would abandon her sooner than fight it. You have calculated wrongly, as you have calculated wrongly at every step since the night you tried to take her back from me on that floor. I do not abandon people, Mrs. Sefton. I learned too late and at a cost you cannot imagine what comes of looking away from cruelty done to a girl that respectable people call merely delicate, and I will not look away again, not for scandal, not for anything. So here is how this ends. You will leave this room. You will leave London, in fact, and retire to the country, and you will trouble neither of these young women again. And in exchange I will not pursue, in the courts and the newspapers, the full and documented account of how the elder Miss Brooke spent 3 years in your charitable keeping, which I assure you I am entirely prepared and equipped to do. That is the bargain. It is more mercy than you have shown, and a great deal more than you deserve, and you will take it, because the alternative is that I make it my personal occupation to ensure that every soul in England learns precisely what Mrs. Sefton means by Christian charity. Go home, madam. You have lost. You lost weeks ago and were too greedy to notice. Go home. And Mrs. Sefton, exposed, outmaneuvered, the room's sympathy turned wholly against her, a duke's cold promise of ruin hanging over her, gathered the rags of her dignity and fled the ball, and left London within the week, and troubled the Brooke sisters no more. And the story that went round London by morning was not the story she had meant to tell, but its precise inversion. The story of the brave, penniless girl who had stood up in a crowded ballroom and told the truth about her own abuse without shame or tears, and the Duke who had stood silent at her shoulder and let her win her own battle and then guarded her flank, and fashionable London, which loves nothing so much as a proud woman vindicated and a villain routed, took Adeline Brooke entirely to its heart, and Mrs. Sefton's name became for a season the thing one called an aunt who was cruel to a dependent, which was a more fitting monument than any court could have raised. The experiment, it should be said, had concluded some little while before the ball, exactly as Adeline had predicted it would, though neither of them had yet spoken the result aloud. They had only gathered the evidence week by week and watched it point, with the stubborn consistency of all true things, in the single direction Adeline had foretold. The less she needed him, the more they wanted each other, and they had both, being careful, wary people marked by their griefs, declined to say so, and circled it until the public business of the aunt forced a great many things into the open at once and made further circling absurd. And there was a quiet hour, near the end of the courting and before the proposal, that Adeline would keep all her life as the moment she first let herself believe in the future. An ordinary afternoon, nothing dramatic in it, which is precisely why it mattered, for the broken are not healed by grand gestures but by the slow accumulation of ordinary safe days until the safety at last becomes believable. It was a wet afternoon, and the three of them were in the dowager's small sitting room, Adeline and Lottie and the Duke, who had by now abandoned all pretense of calling for any reason but to be near her. And there was nothing to do and no crisis to manage, and for once Adeline was not working, not checking accounts or solving a tenant's problem, but simply sitting, idle, by the fire, with Lottie reading aloud in the halting, earnest way of an 11-year-old, and the Duke in the chair opposite with a book he was not reading, and the rain on the windows, and the fire warm. And Adeline realized, with a small shock that stopped her breath, that she was happy, not relieved, not safe merely in the negative way she had learned to value, the absence of hunger, the absence of the grates, the absence of fear. Happy, positively, presently, ordinarily happy, in a warm room with the two people she loved most in the world, with nothing wanting and nothing to dread, and the realization was so unfamiliar that she did not at first recognize the feeling and had to sit very still and identify it, the way one identifies a word in a foreign language one has not heard in years. This is happiness, she thought. I had forgotten. This is what it was, in the rectory, before. This exact feeling, a warm room and people I love and an ordinary, safe afternoon. I thought it was gone forever. I thought that girl was dead. And here it is again, the same feeling in a different room, and I am not dead, and it is not gone. It was only buried, like my mind in the ledger room, waiting all this time for it to be safe to come back. She must have made some sound, or her face must have shown it, for the Duke looked up from the book he was not reading and saw her face and understood. He was very good at understanding her now, and he did not say anything, did not break the moment with words, only looked at her with a question and a tenderness in his gray eyes. And Adeline looked back at him across the warm, ordinary room, with Lottie reading on between them unaware, and she answered the unspoken question with the smallest nod and a smile she did not have to perform, the first wholly unperformed smile she had given anyone in 3 years. And something passed between them in that silence, over the head of an oblivious child, in the firelight, in the rain, some complete understanding, some mutual arrival that was worth more than any speech, and that both of them would remember, ever after, as the true moment they became, in their own minds, a family, long before any wedding made it official. "What are you smiling about?" Lottie demanded, looking up from her book, having felt the change in the room with the radar of a child. "Nothing, dearest," said Adeline. "Go on reading. I am only happy, that is all. I had forgotten how it felt, and I have just remembered, and it made me smile. Go on. I should like to sit here, in this warm room, with the two of you, and be happy, and listen to you read for as long as the afternoon lasts. There is nowhere I would rather be, and nothing I would rather do. Go on, Lottie. Rid." And Lottie, satisfied, went on reading, and the Duke of Hawkridge returned to the book he was not reading, with a small private smile of his own. And Adeline Brooke sat in the warm firelit room with the rain on the windows and the two people she loved most beside her, and was, for the first ordinary, unremarkable afternoon in 3 years, simply and completely happy, and knew it, and named it, and let herself have it, which was the truest sign of all that she was healed. For a broken person learns to value safety, but only a healed one remembers how to be happy, and Adeline had just remembered, in a warm room, on a wet afternoon, with nothing dramatic happening at all, which is exactly where such things are truly found. So it was the night after the ball in the quiet of the Dowager's garden that the Duke of Hawkridge at last stopped being clever, and Adeline Brooke at last stopped being careful, and the conclusion of the long experiment was spoken plainly between them. "I believe," said the Duke, "that we have sufficient evidence." "I believe we do," said Adeline. "You no longer need me in any particular," he said. "Your sister is safe and educated and merry. You are well and strong and have money of your own and a position and the protection of my grandmother and the goodwill of all London after last night. You require rescuing from precisely nothing. There is no field left to drain. By the terms of the experiment, if my regard for you were merely a rescuer's fondness for his finished work, it ought by now to be fading." "And is it fading, Your Grace?" said Adeline. Though she knew the answer, she had been watching the evidence as closely as he. "It is the opposite of fading," said the Duke of Hawkridge. "It has done nothing but deepen week upon week in exact step with how little you need me, which is the proof we agreed upon, and which I now submit to you as concluded. I do not want you because you are broken. You are not broken. You are the least broken, most entirely whole person I know, and you mended yourself in the end. I only fed you and got out of your way. I want you because the world is more interesting with your mind in it, and because I would rather argue with you about crop rotation until 2 a.m. than agree with anyone else about anything, and because you are the one person I have ever met who answers a hard question with a hard or true one instead of a soft false one, and because—" He stopped and abandoned the careful structure of it and simply said the thing. "Because I love you, Adeline, the separate, inconvenient, particular fact of you, who are not my sister and not my rescue and not my redemption and not my good deed, but only and entirely yourself, which is the thing I want and the only thing for the rest of my life. The experiment is concluded. I am asking you to marry me, not to save you." You are saved already and saved yourself. I am asking you to marry me because I cannot imagine a single day I would not rather spend in your company, and I should like to secure as many of them as a man may. That is the whole of the proposal. It is not romantic by the standards of the poets, but it is true, and you trust evidence, and you have all of mine." And Adeline Brooke, who 3 months before had fainted of starvation on a ballroom floor and woken terrified under a stranger's coat, stood now in a moonlit garden, well and whole and unafraid, and looked at the man who had not returned her to that floor, who had instead got her sister out and given her work worth doing and fed her, and waited and answered her meanest fear with a falsifiable proof, and stood silent at her shoulder while she won her own battle and loved her by the only test she trusted, more on the days she needed him least, and she gave him a free woman's answer, which was the first entirely free answer she had given anyone in her adult life. "The evidence is conclusive," she said, "and I am usually right about evidence, and I told you weeks ago what it would show, and it has shown exactly that. So neither of us can pretend to be surprised, which I find I am glad of, for I have had enough surprises, and should like the rest of my life to be a thing I see coming and choose anyway." Her voice was not quite steady for all its dryness. "Yes, Your Grace, I will marry you, not to be saved. I am saved, and I did most of it myself, as you were gentleman enough to admit. I will marry you because you are the one person who ever trusted me to be intelligent, and fed me without being asked, and got my sister out before you reached for anything for yourself, and because I have run your experiment with great care, and the result is not in doubt. The less I need you, the more I love you, which means it was never about the needing at all, which means it is real, which means I may at last let myself want it without fear. So yes, I choose you, freely, as myself, with all my evidence gathered and weighed. I should be honored to argue with you about crop rotation until we are both very old. Let us begin at once." They were married in the early summer, quietly, with only the people who truly loved them, the Dowager Duchess, fierce and triumphant and weeping without the least shame, and Lottie, 11 years old and well and merry and grown an inch since spring, who scattered flowers with the serious concentration of a child entrusted with something important, and a handful of others who had earned their places. And in the years that followed, the Duke and the new Duchess of Hawkridge did a thing together, quietly, that neither sought credit for, in memory of a girl named Margaret who had died at 22 of being unwanted, and a great many girls like her. They made of one of the Hawkridge houses a place for dependent women and girls who had nowhere safe to go. Poor relations, orphaned gentlewomen, servants used past-bearing. The quiet legion of the world's Adelines and Margarets, the ones respectable people called merely delicate while they were slowly used up, a place where such a girl might come and be fed and rest and be trained to a trade or a profession or simply restored to herself, and leave when she was ready, owning her own life. They told no one it was in Margaret's memory, but it was, and Adeline knew it was, and she ran it with the fierce practical competence of a woman who had been one of those girls and knew to the inch what such a girl actually needed, which was not pity and not rescue exactly, but food and rest and work worth doing, and someone who trusted her to be intelligent, the precise things that had been given to her, passed on now to others, multiplying outward from a single ballroom collapse into more saved lives than either of them would ever count. But that is the long view, the year's work, and there is one more small thing to tell first, from the wedding day itself, for it closed a circle that had been open since the first dance. When the wedding breakfast was done, and the few guests had gone, and the summer evening came down gold and warm over the Hawkridge garden, the Duke of Hawkridge came to his wife and bowed, gravely, and held out his hand. "Madam," he said, "I find there is a piece of unfinished business between us, and has been since the night we met, and I should like to conclude it now, if you are willing. We began a dance once, you and I, or rather, you began it with some forgettable young man, and I watched from the wall like a cynic, and before the figure was finished you collapsed, and I carried you off the floor, and I have never returned you to it. You may recall I was rather firm about not returning you to it. I have thought about that a great deal, and I have decided that there is exactly one floor in the world I should like to return you to, now that you are well and strong and entirely yourself, and married to me besides. And it is this one here in our own garden, with no aunt and no borrowed gloves and no 500 candles and no one watching but the roses. We never finished our dance, Adeline. I should like to finish it. Will you dance with me? Properly this time, to the end of the figure, with nothing underneath the smile but the actual fact of being happy, which I am given to understand is how the thing is meant to be done, though neither of us has had much practice. And there was no music, for the musicians had gone home, but the Duke of Hawkridge hummed it badly, the tune of that first interrupted dance, having apparently held it in his memory all these months, and Adeline Brooke, Adeline Hawkridge now in truth and for love, laughed, the free, unguarded laugh of a woman with nothing left to perform, and put her healed hand in her husband's and let him lead her out onto the grass. And they danced the dance they had never finished, the whole figure of it, slowly to a duke's bad humming in the gold summer evening, with the roses for an audience and 3 years of starvation behind her and a whole good life ahead. And this time she did not collapse, and this time he did not carry her off, and this time, at the end of the figure, he did not return her to any floor at all, but only drew her in and held her, well and whole, and weighing exactly what a loved and well-fed woman ought to weigh, and finished the dance the right way, which is to say, without ending it, simply standing there holding her while the tune ran out, in no hurry whatever to let go. So bank your fire now and turn your lamp low and let the dark draw gentle and close. The girl the world used up was caught before she struck the floor, and fed, and mended, and never put back into the machine that was grinding her down. And she grew, in safety, into the whole bright, fearless woman she had always been underneath, and was loved at last for nothing but the fact of being herself. And somewhere tonight by some other fire, in some house I shall never look upon, you have kept her company to the end of her story. And I am glad of it, more glad than I can say, and I should dearly love to know where in the world you have been listening from. Sleep well. There will be another fire and another story when next the candles are lit.